how do we benefit from a state of permanent hostility to Russia? Putin's position has not changed. So the notion that something new is on offer, I think these are misinterpretations disseminated by President Trump, who I think often misinterprets what he hears. I think President Trump is like a lot of leaders. He hears something and then he twists it to think, oh, he gets it, he understands, and he knows what I really want. I think that's part and parcel of the whole thing. Nothing has changed, except that the Russians are now advancing at higher speed, more deeply into Ukraine. And the Russians are not giving anything up. And there's nothing that we can do about that, short of going to war. What's our staying power, ours as Americans, in all of these distant places? It's weaker now than it has been, certainly in 50 years. And if Eisenhower were president, he would have said, you're out of your minds. We can't possibly manage it. We can't run it. We can't protect it. Good luck. Remember, Eisenhower was the man that wanted to neutralize as many of the states in Eastern Europe as possible because he said we could never possibly defend them. So that's one of the reasons you got the Austrian State Treaty. The Austrians did the negotiating, but Eisenhower supported and said, yeah, we can't defend Austria against the Soviets. Impossible. So I don't think President Trump is aware of any of that. And I think he will always declare anything that has a picture of him on it as a huge success story. That's his nature. That's marketing. That's how you make money in New York City. Whether or not it's real is absolutely unimportant. Finally, he's going to talk to the Europeans. That's fine. What difference will that make? Well, it could make some difference because our experience with President Trump is that he's influenced by the last people he spoke with. And the Europeans certainly know how to coddle him, how to make him feel good about himself, how to flatter him. And I think NATO is essentially a herd of cats, and the cats wander off in any particular direction they want at any given point in time. Now, some of the cats further east and south are afraid. And so they listen carefully and they're trying desperately to do what they think we want them to. But they're beginning to wonder about the wisdom of it, doing anything we say. I mean, if you're in Poland or Slovakia or Hungary, do you want to open your borders and allow millions of people into your country to do what has happened in France or Great Britain or Germany, which makes your crime rates sort of skyrocket and destroys the cohesion of your society? I don't think they're fools. And I think the people on the borders right now looking into Ukraine, at some point they're going to say, wait a minute, what are you going to do? We can't go on like this. And as far as Ukraine is concerned, what is the attachment to Zelensky? He says, well, he's been there for 3.5 years. He hasn't made any deals. He's only got one deal. He was picked up by oligarchs, billionaire oligarchs, that put him in there along with the help of Kagan and Blinken and all sorts of other people, go all the way back to 2014. These people want something that can't happen, the destruction of Russia. So we have on one pole the European wish, which is really the globalist last gasp of globalism, that wants to see Europe destroyed as a European civilization and doesn't give a damn about us. And on the other pole are the Russians, who are not going to be destroyed. Now, how do you make a compromise between these two groups? The globalists, who are pushing this war and dragging us into it, and the Russians, who desperately want an end to the war, but they can't end it unless they can be certain that a future government in Ukraine will not emerge to rekindle the war and kill them. I mean, remember, these are the people that found the 23 biolabs, where they discovered all of this research designed to murder Slavs. I mean, come on, this is not a minor issue if you're a Russian. Ukrainians, they haven't come clean on this. They can't. They would be hauled, if there were a real international court of justice, they'd be in a lot of trouble. Today, I was reading accounts of the numbers of people being murdered in towns and villages that the Russians are overrunning that are no longer being defended. Who's killing these people and why? Are these Ukrainians that have said we're not going to fight? Stalin murdered 1 million Soviet soldiers who said we're not fighting. And there were another million Soviet soldiers, Russians and Ukrainians, who fought with the Germans. That's 2 million people. Now, that was a different time, but what I'm saying is I'm seeing these Stalinist approaches in Kiev. That's what they're behaving like. Was this the SBU, the secret police that murders people on the way out? Because that's the kind of thing the NKVD did all the time. So if you're a Russian right now looking at this, I think your expectations of anything good coming out of Alaska are very, very low. And there's no understanding of our playing with fire. And this is the final thing that needs to be kept in mind. When you look at people in Moscow, the man who understands the most about the West and is most inclined to work with the West is Vladimir Putin. Now, once you move away from him, the attitude there is very much Dostoevsky's back in the 1870s and 80s. Dostoevsky reached a conclusion: Europeans don't regard us as Europeans. Europeans don't like us. They treat us badly. We've wasted a lot of blood and treasure on Europe. We are at least as Asiatic as we are European. We should focus elsewhere. Well, that was Dostoevsky, and that's what, not 200 years ago, but 150. That's the attitude in Moscow increasingly. That's why these threats of sanctions and everything else, they don't mean anything anymore. They can get around those. They've understood that, and they're building parallel institutions. The Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Brazilians, all these states are beginning to develop a parallel system. And what you're ending up with, again, is a split in the world between the United States, North America, you could say, but principally us and Europeans, West Europeans primarily, and the rest of the world. I mean, it's kind of astonishing when you stop and think about it. And nobody seems to understand or appreciate any of that in the United States. And he's talking about all these mineral resources. Well, we knew that Russia, before this war even began, probably had somewhere between 40 and 50 trillion dollars, in resources, mineral resources, oil, gas, timber, everything. It wasn't just what's in the Donbass or the Donetsk Basin. The entire country of Russia. All of a sudden now, we're being told we have to fight for what's in Donetsk and Luhansk in the Donbass Basin, and we can't let the Russians have this. Well, wait a minute, that's like the Russians saying, "Well, we need to go back into Alaska and get access to all that oil and gas and all the mineral wealth that's in Alaska because we just can't let those Yankees have it." And good luck with that. That's crazy. It's insane. It makes no sense. Americans aren't listening to the craziness, the stupidity, and the lies that are coming out of these people's mouths. They really need to listen. But Dan, I don't think they are.
And part of it is I don't think they know, because when that's the only story that they hear, and they hear Lindsey Graham 50 times in 20 days, some of them just come to believe what he's saying without any knowledge. In the last few minutes we have here, I want to look on the other side of the pond here, and then the other side of the negotiating table for Trump on our side, and that is the Europeans, because there's going to be a big meeting tomorrow where apparently they're going to try to get Trump on the phone or on a VTC, video teleconference. And you keep mentioning that issue about whoever's in the last in the room. And if I think that this was intentionally designed just 48 hours before the Trump-Putin meeting, that Europe wants to go in and try to get Trump to go to their side. Here's what they're saying. Gary, if you can put that screen up. This is a Wall Street Journal. Europe's red lines, interesting use of that phrase here, include stressing that a ceasefire must be the first step in a deal, and that any territorial exchanges must be reciprocal and based on current front lines, and that a long-term security guarantee for Ukraine, and a code for NATO. They said European leaders also plan to make a final push to persuade Trump he should allow Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other European heads of government to participate in the meetings with Putin. I don't see any chance that any of those things would even be considered in Moscow, much less a European red line. I mean, what does that even mean?
Well, in the absence of American military power, it means nothing. And that's what President Trump needs to bear in mind. That's something he understood when I last talked to him back in November of 2020. He understood that very, very well. The Europeans can't enforce any red lines. We're the ones that are expected to enforce those red lines. We're back to American military power has to be on call to enforce red lines that the Europeans have developed for Ukraine. Think about that. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make any sense.
Not for us.
That may be General Keene's view. That may be Lindsey Graham's view, because I don't know who they're invested in to the point where, well, you know, everybody on the Hill has all this insider information and makes lots of money in the stock market. Maybe they figure if this goes their way, then they'll make lots of money as a result. I don't know. I don't really care at this point. My concern is the notion that these red lines that the Europeans are devising depend entirely on enforcement from the United States Armed Forces, and specifically, as you and I both know, ultimately on the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm not interested in that. I don't want that. I don't think 99% of Americans, if you sat them down at the table and said, this is what you're expected to back, would sign up for it. We need to go back to something Trump has said, and he is right about this in one sense. He said, this is not my war. I didn't want this. He was right about that when he said it, and he's been wrong ever since he walked away from it. He needs to get back to that. And he ought to come out of this meeting, I think, with nothing, frankly, because we can't get anything. We have nothing to offer. And the Europeans are making sure that whatever he does, whatever compromise he offers, is unacceptable to them. At which point in time he needs to say, it's your show. It's not our show anymore. I'm pulling the forces out. I don't know if he sat down with anybody and figured out how much it is costing us to maintain 100,000 troops along the border with Ukraine. I don't think he understands that. I don't think he understands our investments in NATO, military and otherwise. I don't think he understands any of those costs. He's focused on this latest deal with the EU, which, by the way, von der Leyen can't even enforce. People in Europe are already balking at the tariff deal that he cut with von der Leyen. He needs to wake up and say, wait a minute, we can't be bothered with this. What are America's interests? What are our strategic interests? He should enunciate those. And if he tries to stand up in front of the American people and say, it is our strategic interest that Russia be destroyed in eastern Ukraine, he's going to be laughed off the stage. Who cares? Nobody wants anything to do with that. And by the way, I don't see hundreds of thousands of Norwegians, Swedes, Finns, Dutch, Germans, Englishmen rushing up to enlist to fight the great war in eastern Ukraine. I wouldn't hold my breath if I were Donald Trump waiting for that to happen. So his notion of you got to spend at least 5% on defense, forget it, Donald, forget it. These people aren't going to do a damn thing. You know, he once asked me, you know, what do you think it will take for the Germans to finally invest in their own defense and step up to the plate, so to say, and do what they need to do? And I said, we have to leave. And he looked at me and he said, I think you're right. That's the truth. He needs to go back to that. Go back to the basics. He was right in 2020. He was right in his first term about everything he said regarding NATO. He needs to get back to that. This is a dead end. How many times have you heard him say, well, I knew President Putin and I thought we had a good relationship? Well, it doesn't have anything to do with it. This is about interests. What are Russia's interests? What are our interests? Somebody says, well, wait a minute, what about Ukraine's interests? Well, those interests were sacrificed the moment that Zelensky decided to die on the battlefield, which is what 1.8 million Ukrainians have done. So that man obviously doesn't give a damn about the Ukrainian people. The real question should be, we Americans would like to normalize relations with Russia. We would like to know how you think we can proceed to do that, because in my judgment, that's important. That's the one most important thing at this stage of the game. And this is something that the neocon globalists and the rest in Washington, New York City, and the city of London do not want. They do not want a normalization of relations between ourselves and Russia. Ukraine is their permanent open sore that they will poke repeatedly and cause to bleed in the hopes that they can prevent that in perpetuity. He has to be smarter, and he has to stay. Look, we've gone as far as we can go. I, as president of the United States, can go no further. I am urging my NATO partners to sit down and talk about this, not just with Mr. Zelensky, but with President Putin, because this is a European matter to be settled by Europeans. That's what I would do. And I would get the hell out of there, along with all of our troops. There's nothing for us to do there anymore. We don't want to fight a war with Russia. The Russians know that. The Russians don't want to fight a war with us. We know that. So let's stop the charade. Let's just end it. We're leaving, you know. And, President Zelensky and Mr. Starmer and Mr. Macron and Mr. Merz, his three biggest supporters, they can all sit down and huddle with him and reach some sort of conclusion regarding how they wish to proceed with Russia. But we do not want to be dragged into a war with Russia. And this whole Article 5 nonsense that commits us automatically to war with Russia has got to go away. This is the sort of stupidity that led to the First World War. Remember, we had all these alliances, the two alliance systems. Everything was, on hair trigger. And so suddenly war begins and everyone piles on. This sort of thing is the last thing in the world that we want. It should be the last thing in the world anybody wants. It's time to be rational, come to terms with reality, and end this thing for us. And I'll guarantee you, once we end it for us, it won't be long before the European governments turn over and change, and you get an end to this war. They see the hostility with Russia, the permanent conflict with Russia, as helping to maintain their positions. They're wrong. They're not going to last because financially, they're all on the edge of total ruin. We are already headed into a severe recession. The severe recession, depending upon what we do in the near future, could become a depression. No one wants to do what needs to be done in order to build prosperity in the West. That is, cut spending, rein in the stupidity, end the pointless commitment to conflict and wars. Nobody wants to go there because if you do that, your whole raison d'etre is going to be questioned. So they have to keep things as they are, maintain the status quo, continue the hostility with Russia. What President Putin has to do, and I think he knows this, is frankly continue to be patient. He can be patient, and the longer he waits, the worse the conditions in Europe become for these leaders. The higher the probability that they will fall and be replaced by nationalists who are going to say, wait a minute, there's no interest in Germany in a war with Russia. Even the Poles, if you look at the Polish polling data, have said, we don't want any war with Russia. This is crazy. We don't know how many Polish soldiers have actually been killed in the war. I've heard estimates to be 10,000. Others have told me 20,000. But they've lost severely with absolutely no return on that investment whatsoever. I think they've exhausted in Poland this unrelenting hatred for all things Russian. I think the population has said it's over, and we've got all these Ukrainians that need to go home. We want to get them out of Poland. You have a similar growing feeling in Germany, and you have a problem in Great Britain right now. The population there is wondering why they have to give way to all of these foreigners that have come into their country, why their citizenship is meaningless, their identity is meaningless. I think the mayor of London has recently forbidden all of the taxi cabs to have a Union Jack, in other words, a British flag, shown on any of the taxis. I mean, this sort of active suppression of national identity is absolutely unacceptable across Europe. These people are on the wrong side of history. It's interesting to hear that discussion. And then let's face it, what do these people have for armed forces? They're Lilliputian forces.
Right.
It's a joke. The Russians would crush these people. Our own forces are too small for any serious war right now. despite the enormous amounts of money that we've plowed into them. So the whole thing is a comic opera. It doesn't deserve to be taken seriously. But I think the Russians will go to Istanbul, and they will listen, and they will present their side. But I just don't know how the representatives who come there from Ukraine can expect to accomplish anything if they think they're going to have a bullet through their head from the Ukrainian secret police, the SBU, when they come back to Kiev and point out that, look, we need neutrality. The Russians guarantee it. We can get other Europeans to guarantee it. We're going to lose this territory in these areas, but we need peace. Ukraine is in ruins. If they say that, I think they'll simply be executed. That's how bad the situation is in Ukraine.
So then can you boil it down to as simple as the European leaders that were assembled there have made a calculated choice to keep the rhetoric going, to make it where Putin can't agree to anything that they want, knowing that he won't, so that the war will continue in Ukraine, but not go beyond that? I mean, can you cynically say that that's their intent?
Well, I think there's also behind the scenes enormous interest in Great Britain, probably France as well, in the Greater Israel Project as an opportunity to destroy Iran as a country and to gain control of Iran's natural resources. Remember, the original idea behind the stupidity in Ukraine was just to utilize the Ukrainians to, quote unquote, harm Russia. They actually believed that they could destroy the regime. In other words, that the Putin government would fall, the Russian population would turn on its government, the society would fragment. This is part of the mirror imaging that we go through. We see the deteriorating cohesion in our societies in the West, thanks to mass uncontrolled immigration. And we assume that they too suffer from a similar lack of cohesion, but they don't. On the contrary, there's enormous cohesion in Russia that is, after all, 80% of the population consists of Orthodox Christian Russians. Makes a huge difference. But they've also done an excellent job of integrating the Muslim peoples that live inside their country. The largest group, of course, are the Chechens, but there are others. And so they have a social contract or compact with all the people there that is very strong. We've ignored that and believed that we could destroy it. Well, that has failed miserably. So now the effort is, how do we sustain ourselves? Let's go after Iran. Let's break it up. Use the Israeli Greater Israel Project as a pretext to introduce U.S. and allied military power into the equation to destroy Iran and get control of Iranian oil and natural gas resources, including the Persian Gulf. Then we can sustain ourselves in Europe without any dependence whatsoever ever again on Russian natural gas and oil. Well, this is
so let me ask you just real quick, because I want to stick with the European stuff here, but that you bring up a good point that needs to be addressed real quick, because you talk about this is what a lot of the so-called globalists, what they apparently want in the Middle East.
That for a very long time he has tried to figure out how he can come to terms with the Iranians, because I think there's an appreciation for the dangers associated with blowing the Iranian war up. So that's true. But the problem is that his intentions, however good they may be, don't mean anything. He doesn't take a concrete stand of any kind for any length of time. You can't do business like that. It's sort of like a teenager on TikTok that has the attention span of 30 seconds, a minute, and then goes to the next TikTok video. We've been treating policy that way. And people outside the country look at us and say, wait a minute, how long does policy last in your country? Well, historically, over the last 20 years or so, 25 years, I think they've concluded it lasts for one election cycle. And then you get a new group of people to talk. I mean, Charles or Chaz Freeman said it best many years ago to me. He says, we get a president in with a new administration, and they proceed to lobotomize Washington. In other words, throw everything overboard and start over, as though they have the answer. And the fresh set of eyes will prove brilliant. Well, this is being catastrophic for us.
because other nations look for long-term strategic organization and goals that lead, hopefully, to prosperity and peace. Well, we haven't even done that over the last 90 to 100 days under President Trump. He's all over the map. So asking me, where does President Trump fit? Well, if you have no coherent strategy, it's back to the original statement. If you don't know where you're going, then any particular road looks good at any given point in time.